In the unforgiving Badlands of 1882nd Wyoming, where blizzards scour the flesh from bone and kindness is rarer than silver, a ragged boy halts at an unknown cabin with only blistered palms and iron will to barter. 11-year-old Elias hauls his 5-year-old sister Clara across drifts that swallow footprints, hunting any soul willing to swap labor for bread. When he spies a ribbon of smoke curling from a battered shack wedged among the junipers, he senses this could be their final hope before starvation drags them under. The woman who cracks the door is as scarred and wary as her wind-lashed refuge. Yet Elias's plea slices through decades of exile. "I'll mend your shack. Old woman, just feed my little sister first." What sorrow chained Abigail Thorne to these forsaken hills? And will this child's frantic deal open the wounds they all ache to mend? Before we dive deeper, drop a line. Where are you reading from tonight? And if these words stir you, hit subscribe. Tomorrow I've set aside something truly unforgettable. The warped pine door groaned open barely enough for one storm gray eye to glare through the slit. Half a dozen rusted latches rattled as Abigail Thorne measured the two waifs on her stoop like ghosts of a life she'd burned behind her. "We don't open for beggars out here," she snapped, voice brittle as hoarfrost. "Keep moving." Elias shifted Clara's feather-light frame on his back, her thin arms cinching his throat. The child hadn't uttered a sound in 3 days, not since they scraped the last crumbs of stale hardtack from their mother's burlap pouch. Her breath fluttered hot and shallow against his cheek. "Please, ma'am," Elias said, forcing his spine straight though weariness gnawed his marrow. "I ain't begging. I'm proposing honest exchange." Abigail's eye narrowed. Through the gap she took in the boy's coat, stitched and restitched until the patches had patches, his boots lashed together with rawhide thongs. But his shoulders stayed square, his stare unflinching. The tiny girl draped over him bore the sunken cheeks of true famine, not the mild gripe of a skipped supper. "What could a runt like you possibly trade?" Abigail demanded. "Labor," Elias answered, plain as daylight. "Solid, useful labor. Your roof's missing half its shakes, the veranda's punky clear through, and that chimney's fixing to topple. I can set it all right. You're just a young un. 11, ma'am, and I've swung a hammer beside my ma since I could lift one." Elias's tone carried the calm certainty of someone aged beyond years. "My ma was the best joiner in 4 territories before the pox carried her off." Abigail weighed him in silence. The boy's face held none of the sly hunger she'd learned to spot in drifters who'd darkened her door across the seasons. His gaze was open, unflinching, stripped of guile. "Even if that's gospel," she said, "I ain't got victuals to waste on 2 more bellies." "Only her then," Elias cut in fast. "Clara's the one starving. I'll scrape by on leavings." The woman behind the door froze. She'd honed the craft of repelling intruders for 7 long winters. Tinkers, preachers, lost pilgrims, prying ranchers, all dispatched with the same icy dispatch. But the way the boy spoke his sister's name sent an unexpected pang beneath her ribs. "Prove it," she said abruptly. "Ma'am, prove you can do what you brag." Abigail jabbed a gnarled finger at the collapsed veranda stairs. "Mend those planks. Make 'em worse, and you're gone. Make 'em better, maybe we talk." Elias dipped his chin and eased Clara down onto a broad boulder beside the shack. The child's knees buckled like wilted reeds, too frail to hold her upright. Abigail felt a twist behind her sternum at the sight. From his mother's cracked leather belt, Elias drew a claw hammer and a short pry bar. He inspected the decayed boards with the deliberate eye of someone raised by grain and gale. In moments he'd traced the rot to a clogged eave spout that had dripped unchecked for seasons. Abigail observed through the cracked door while the boy set to work. His motions were spare, seasoned. No flourish, no wasted swing. When he levered up the first punky plank, he did it with the patience of a surgeon, saving every inch that still had heartwood. "Where's your scrap stack?" Elias asked, eyes still on the grain. "Round back." Abigail answered before her tongue caught up with her caution. "But I never said—" "Much obliged, ma'am." Elias vanished around the corner and returned with 2 cured cedar boards, chosen as if he'd known the pile his whole life. Clara watched him from the boulder, gaze fixed with the stillness of a child who'd learned that her brother's skill was the only fence between them and the dark. The sun was brushing the juniper crowns when Elias stepped back. The veranda stairs rang true under Abigail's testing boot, flush, square, and braced. He'd even rerouted the clogged eave spout so the drip would never return. "They'll carry you through spring," Elias said, dusting cedar shavings from his knees. "But that east wall's begging for new shakes before the big snows, and your ridge has a dozen curlers I can spot from here." Abigail stared at the work, then at the boy who waited with the quiet poise of a man twice his age. Clara had folded herself against the foundation stones, eyelids too heavy to fight. "One night," Abigail said at last, easing the door wide. "One night and we'll see." Elias's frame loosened, but his voice stayed level. "Thank you, ma'am. You'll not rue it." Abigail wasn't convinced, yet the door swung open anyway. Elias unbuckled his mother's cracked tool roll with the reverence of laying out relics, spreading it across the rough-hewn pine table beside the hearth. Each iron had its pocket, burnished by years of calloused palms. The claw hammer's haft carried the ghost of his mother's grip. Elias's smaller fingers were learning the same curve. Abigail set a tin cup of broth and a heel of cornbread before Clara, who sat swaddled in a blanket that smelled of sage and long-ago smoke. The child's eyes went round at the miracle of a table for walls and a fire that didn't sputter. "Sip, don't gulp," Abigail warned, softer than she'd spoken in years. "Your belly's forgotten how." Elias watched Clara spoon broth with trembling care, his own gut knotting like rawhide. But Clara was fed. The world could wait. He turned to the room, reading it the way his mother had taught, by touch and by truth. The cabin was tight-built, logs dovetailed clean, chinking once proud, but now shrunken and cracked. A riverstone hearth ruled the north wall, drawing smoke straight despite the list Elias had clocked outside. Hand-planed chairs and a drop-leaf table whispered of a craftswoman who'd love the grain. "She's got strong bones," Elias said, thumb tracing a sill. "But this daubing's gone brittle. Come January, you'll have wind sharp enough to skin a cat." Abigail tracked him as he circled, noting rot with the calm of a surveyor. When he paused at a seam where mud had fallen away, he pressed 2 fingers to the log beneath instead of poking the hole. "How long you been reading houses like scripture?" Abigail asked. "Since I could steady a square," Elias answered. "Ma said fine joinery was listening to what the tree still wanted to be, then letting it get there honest." "And your mother?" Elias's hands quit the sill, buried her 4 moons back. "Pox took her in a week. I'm sorry for your loss." The words landed plain, no varnish of pity. Elias met her eyes. Abigail's face carried sorrow like a brand, not the polite grief of townsfolk who'd only known his mother's name. Pa walked out when Clara was still and swaddling. Elias went on, the story spilling sudden and necessary. "Ma raised us alone, taught me every trick of the trade. Said a body who could shape timber would never go hungry." Abigail watched Clara drain the last of the broth and burrow deeper into the blanket, lashes fluttering towards sleep. "What came after your mother passed?" she asked, voice low so as not to startle the child. "Folks pitched in for a spell," Elias said. "But winters lean everywhere. Can't blame a body for guarding their own. So you've been drifting, trading sweat for supper?" "Yes, ma'am. Most doors see a boy lugging a toddler and reckon we're a net loss." Abigail refilled her tin mug from the enamel pot, steam curling like question marks. The boy's tale rang true, and the stair repair had been the work of a journeyman. Still, 2 extra mouths clashed with 7 years of practiced solitude. "The fixes you're naming, new daub, roof shakes, that's grown man labor. No denying it," Elias said, meeting her square. "I can't match a full-grown's heft, but what I lift I set true the first time." To seal the claim, he slid a narrow chisel from the roll and stepped to the cracked seam. He chipped out the old mud in neat curls, exposing clean log beneath. "Need fresh clay," he murmured, and this stretch redone before the first hard freeze. Abigail couldn't help but nod. The boy's cuts were clean, his wrist steady, tools kept keen. Clara's breathing had even in his sleep, cheek pillowed on folded arms. Elias glanced over. The look in his eyes was older than his face. "There's a shed out back," Abigail said. "Dry, with quilts enough. You'll bunk there tonight." "Thank you, ma'am. We'll talk terms at sunup." "If we talk terms," she corrected, "there'll be rules." "Understood." He rolled the tools away with the same care a priest gives relics. Each iron kissed home into its pocket. "Full names?" "Elias Carver, ma'am. This here's Clara, Abigail Thorne, and Elias." She halted as he scooped the sleeping child against his chest. "Honest labor earns respect. We'll see what dawn brings." Morning light slid across the table where Abigail set a rose-patterned tea service, bone china so thin it glowed. The petals looked hand-painted by someone who'd once had time for beauty. Elias stopped in the doorway, Clara's small fist curled in his. Neither child had ever seen cups that looked ready to bruise at a harsh word. "Ma'am," Elias said, "plain mugs would do us proud." Abigail centered the sugar bowl. Real white crystals, not the raw chunks most scrape by on. "This set crossed an ocean with my grandmother. It was meant for mornings, not mothballs." She motioned them in. Clara scrambled onto a chair, boots swinging. Elias waited until Abigail sat, then folded himself beside his sister like a knight at a foreign court. "Milk, Clara?" Abigail asked, tilting the tiny pitcher. Clara glanced at Elias, wide-eyed. They'd never tasted real tea. Only the bitter steep their mother coaxed from sassafras and whatever the wind dropped in the yard. "A splash of milk would be grand," Elias answered for Clara. "Thank you, ma'am." Abigail poured with the same steady wrist she'd once used to serve Sunday guests, though her heart gave an odd lurch at the sight of small hands folded politely at her table. It had been a lifetime since children's chatter bounced off these logs. "Tell me your road," she said, easing into her chair. "How far have you walked?" "We lit out from Dry Gulch," Elias said, cradling the cup in both palms as if it might take flight. "Rough 50 miles south. Been on Shank's mare nigh 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Abigail's gaze slid to Clara's wrists, bird bone beneath the sleeves. "That's a cruel stretch for short legs." "Clara's iron under the skin," Elias said, pride soft in his throat. "Never whined once, even when the last crust gave out 4 dawns ago." Clara risked a sip. Her eyes went round as coins at the honeyed warmth. She glanced up at Abigail like the woman had conjured sunlight in a cup. "Why not stop in the settlements you passed?" Abigail pressed. Elias's face shuddered. "Tried. Most want to parcel us out, Clara to some farm wife, me to the blacksmith, or worse, ship her to the state foundling home in the capital. And you'll have none of that." "No, ma'am. She's mine to keep safe. Mom made me swear it the night the fever took her." Abigail set her cup down, studying the boy's set chin. She knew that brand of loyalty. It had once lived in her own marrow. "Your mother raised a straight grain. The truest," Elias said. "Could frame a house, birth a colt, or whittle a cradle that'd rock itself. Said honest work was prayer you could touch. And she taught you the craft." "Tried to." "Said I had the eye and the steady hand." Elias spread his fingers, scarred, calloused, too old for 11 years. "Ma always claimed a man's soul showed in the joints he left behind." Clara had drifted, cheek on her forearm, lulled by heat and the first full belly in weeks. Abigail found her own gaze softening on the sleeping child. "Too young for the trail's teeth," she murmured. "Not for long," Elias vowed. "Soon as I land steady pay, I'll raise us a real roof. Stone sill, shingle lid, windows that drink the dawn. Patch of dirt where Clara can plant posies if she fancies. Lean-to shop for taking orders." Abigail arched a brow. "You've got the blueprint in your head?" "Ma scratched it on butcher paper before the end. Said every soul deserved a picture of home." Something long knotted inside Abigail's ribs gave a slow, reluctant unwind. "Maybe," she said, measuring her words, "we talk a winter contract. You spoke of work needing hands." Elias straightened, hope flaring cautious. "Yes, ma'am. I'm open to terms," Abigail said. "We'll lay them out clean at first light." She tapped the glass of the old barometer nailed beside the door. The needle had plunged farther overnight than in any season she could recall. The brass filigree glinted like a warning. "What's that gadget?" Elias asked, laying the whetstone aside after putting a final edge on the splitting maul. "Weather glass," Abigail said, eyes still fixed on the falling needle. "Belonged to my late husband. He set store by such things, said a body who could read the sky could outguess the mountains." Elias stepped closer to the mantel. The barometer was a city-bred luxury, polished brass, etched numerals, the sort of thing he'd only glimpsed behind plate glass in the territorial capital. "What's it preaching?" Abigail's fingertip traced the mercury's dive. "Big blow and a month early. First real snow usually waits till after Thanksgiving." Through the single window the sky had curdled to a sickly brass. Wind rattled the shutters and flung brittle leaves in frantic spirals. Ravens wheeled overhead, cawing alarms as they arrowed for cover. "How ugly?" Elias asked. "Ugly enough to bury a man before he knows he's lost." Abigail leaned into the pane, reading the cloud walled away sailors' red swells. "Early season storms are meanest. They catch folks with their barns half full and their wood half split." Clara looked up from the rag doll Abigail had dug out of cedar chest. The child's brow puckered, sensing the room's sudden gravity. "Does that mean we gotta go?" she whispered. Abigail and Elias traded a long look. The question floated between them like a lit fuse. Elias had figured to earn a week's keep and move on. But a blizzard with a 5-year-old in tow was a death sentence. "If the glass is true," Abigail said, "anyone caught outside won't see another sunrise." Mountain winters don't grade on a curve. Elias felt the old iron weight settle on his sternum. Another life-or-death call for his sister. Every mile since their mother's grave had carried the same stakes, but this one felt absolute. How long could it pin us? Days, maybe a month. When it lifts, drifts could be chin-high till April. The words hit Elias like a maul. Stay, and they'd be beholden to Abigail for half a year. Leave, and the storm would swallow them. Stay and outstay their welcome, and she might pitch them into the same white grave. "Ma'am," Elias said, choosing each word like a nail, "you've already done more than we had any claim to. If the blow's coming tonight, we need plain talk. If you want us gone before it seals the pass, say it now, and we'll shoulder our packs." Abigail studied the boy's face, too young for the worry carved there. Then the child clutching a corn shuck doll like a lifeline. Something long calcified inside her chest gave a slow, audible crack. "Storm will break by midnight, maybe sooner," she said. "Even if you started walking this minute, you'd never clear the ridge. We're snowed in either way." She crossed to the pantry, inventorying shelves by lamplight. Beans, salt pork, cornmeal, lamp oil, split pine. Question is whether we ride it out as family pulling one rope or as strangers counting crumbs till thaw. Elias straightened, hope and dread braided tight. Family would mean what, exactly? Everything shared. Chores, rations, say, and how we winterproof this place. You and Clara stop being boarders and start being hands on deck. Your voices count same as mine on how we ride this winter, Abigail said. And in trade, she swept her gaze across the cabin, seeing it fresh. The patched porch, the oiled tools, the way Elias cradled Clara's worries like they were his own. "I want your word you'll stay the course. If we're to outlast the snow, we lean on each other like family. Full trust, no half measures." Elias looked to Clara, then back to Abigail. "Come spring, we take fresh bearings. Maybe we light out and raise that house I sketched. Maybe we stay and grow this place into something stouter. By then, maybe we're the kind that don't need to vote on it." The wind clawed the shutters. The first heavy flakes smacked the pane like thrown gravel. Elias drew his skinning knife and stepped to the pale aspen leaning against the cabin wall. With 3 clean strokes, he peeled a palm-sized sheet of bark, thin and smooth as vellum, and pinned it to the log with his thumb. "What are you at?" Abigail asked from the doorway, snow already dusting her braid. "Putting it in ink," Elias said, fishing a charred stick from the hearth. Ma swore a man's word was iron, but paper keeps the rust off. Abigail leaned in, startled by the neat block letters blooming under the boy's hand. Schoolhouse script, not trail scrawl. "You said a fair line." Ma said a builder who couldn't cipher or read a plan would star between jobs. Elias glanced up. Name your clauses. Abigail weighed the leap she was taking after 7 silent winters. First, this is wages, not alms. You earn yours and Clara's keep with sweat and skill. Elias wrote, Elias Carver to perform all repair and upkeep on Abigail Thorne's homestead in exchange for full board for himself and Clara Carver through winter. Second, Abigail went on boundaries. My bedroom stays mine, your kit stays yours. He added, mutual respect for private quarters and property. Clara had crept outside, snowflakes melting on her lashes, fascinated by the charcoal marks. What about lessons? Abigail said suddenly, little girls need letters. Elias's hand paused. I've scratched what I know on slate, but it's poor schooling. Would you take that on? I taught 3 terms back in Kansas. Abigail said, softer. I can teach her. Elias wrote, Abigail Thorne to provide daily schooling to Clara Carver. Now the hard clause, Abigail said. What if we rub each other raw? Snowed in, short fuse, no escape till May. Elias met her eyes, steady. Spring thaw, we part clean if we must. No grudges. But ma'am, we don't make storms indoors. We work, we keep quiet, we're thankful. I believe you, Abigail said. Still, winter chews nerves. We need a rule for when tempers spark. Speak plain before the spark catches, Elias offered. Any soul feeling crowded says it calm and quick. No festering. Abigail nodded once. Elias scratched the final line. Disagreements settled by open words. Same day, no grudges carried. Elias scratched the last line, then looked up. One more, he said. If the trail takes me, wolf, fall, fever, promise Clara won't be alone. Not just till thaw, but till she can stand on her own. Abigail's breath caught. She watched Clara squat in the fresh snow, drawing wobbly ABCs with a mitten tip. Elias, that's... Please, ma'am. She's got nobody else, and you've got a steady heart. I see it plain. Abigail swallowed. If anything happens to you, Clara stays. She'll have a home here till she's grown. My word on it. The boy's shoulders eased as if a yoke had lifted. He wrote the clause, read the whole bark aloud in a clear, steady voice, then signed Elias Carver in firm strokes. He handed the charcoal over. Partnership, Abigail said, adding Abigail Thorne with a quick, decisive slash. Elias rolled the bark tight, bound it with a leather thong, and tucked it inside his shirt. Safekeeping, he said. Proof we're kin now, legal as any courthouse. Outside, the storm threw its full weight against the cabin. Inside, 3 souls who'd been strangers at sunrise began battening hatches together. Abigail unrolled a hand-inked map across the table, anchoring corners with river pebbles. The parchment showed a spread far grander than the single cabin and corral Elias had guessed at. Your line runs clear to Sagebrush Wash? He asked, finger following the thin blue ribbon. 240 acres, Abigail said. Most figure I've got a shack and a prayer. I let him. Elias leaned closer. The map was a masterpiece. Contour lines, watercourses, timber stands, soil patches, even tiny icons for elk trails and berry thickets, each inked in different colors. Ma'am, this is survey grade. You paced every rod yourself. For summer's work, Abigail said, pride soft in her voice. My husband showed me chain and compass before the lung fever took him. Said land you don't know will starve you sure as drought. Clara climbed onto Abigail's knee to see better. What are the little drawings? Treasures, Abigail told her, tapping symbols. This X is a stand of dead ironwood. Seasoned 3 years, burns hot and slow. That swirl by the wash is clay thick enough to daub a palace. Elias traced garden plots staggered across south-facing slopes. Clever. Shade crops here, sun lovers there, herbs at the doorstep. Every step saved is a step earned, Abigail said. And this square downstream, old grist house. Wheels busted, but the stone walls could hold a new mill, a forge, whatever the years ask. Been using it for dry storage, Abigail said, but the bones are solid. New paddles, fresh axle, and she'd grind again if a body had the know-how. Elias's thoughts raced ahead. A working mill could barter flour for salt, coffee, wool. Anything the land itself couldn't cough up. "Winter meat?" he asked, tapping the tiny hoof prints inked along a contour line. "Deer file through that draw at first light," Abigail said, pointing to a brush blind she'd woven years back. "Snowshoe hare here, here, and here. Game enough if you read sign and season right." "You've mapped a whole world," Elias breathed. "Had to. One misstep alone, and the mountain keeps you. Know it proper, and it feeds you back." Elias saw the homestead anew. Not raw wilderness, but a living engine. Every cog placed a spin with least waste, most gain. "Could we walk it?" Before the sky shuts the door. Abigail rolled the map. Quick boots, then. Glass is still falling. They layered wool and leather and followed packed trails Elias hadn't noticed yesterday. He carried Clara piggyback when snow deepened. At the mill house, he knelt, running hands over the cracked wheel. "Rot's only skin deep. Gearing's true. Ma showed me water wheels. Same rules as any wooden works, just bigger." They checked the clay bank, the stacked cords of ironwood, the terrace garden pockets. Each stop peeled back another layer of deliberate craft. "Ma'am," Elias said on the trudge home, snow now hissing sideways, "this ain't a homestead. It's a quiet kingdom. You could raise a tribe here." Silence stretched, broken only by wind. "I drew it for a tribe," Abigail said at last. Never got the chance to fill the chairs. Back inside, Elias knelt to pry a warped floorboard under the kitchen window. The bar slipped, hooked something solid. A cedar box the size of a loaf tumbled free, lid springing open. Photographs, letters, a child's wooden horse, scattered across the planks like startled birds. Abigail froze at the stove, spoon midair. Color drained from her face. Elias reached to gather the spill. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know." His apology died. In a cracked silver frame lay a younger Abigail, arm around a broad-shouldered man with gentle eyes. Between them stood two children, an 8-year-old boy with Elias's same wary squint, and a girl Clara's age, gap-toothed and laughing. All four beamed at the camera as if the world could never break them. Abigail dropped into the rocker as though her knees had turned to water. She lifted the photograph with shaking fingers, pressing it to her heart like a relic too sacred to hold in the open. "Taken in Billings," she breathed. "Summer 75. The last one." Elias set the pry bar aside and stepped near, voice low. "Your family." She nodded, tears carving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Jacob. And the kids. Henry, 8, Ruth, 5. Her thumb brushed each face as if they might still feel it. "Last picture we ever had." "What took them?" "Diphtheria." The word cracked like a rifle shot. "Winter of 75. Hit the valley hard, mostly the young ones. Mine went first, then Jacob trying to nurse them." Her shoulders heaved. "I never even ran a fever. Just watched." Elias's own throat closed. He knew orphan grief, but to bury a husband and 2 children in one season, he couldn't stretch his mind around the size of that hole. "Town turned on me," Abigail went on, voice barely a thread. "Whispered I must have carried in on my skirts. Said it wasn't right a mother walked out when her babies didn't." "That's cruel nonsense," Elias said, fierce and quiet. "Sickness don't keep score. I know that now. Then I believed I was cursed. Sold the house, the stock, everything. Rode up here to finish dying alone." Clara had padded over dull forgotten. Without a sound, she climbed into Abigail's lap and locked thin arms around her neck. Abigail shattered, sobs muffled in the child's hair, while Clara patted her back with the solemn kindness of someone who'd been comforted the same way. Elias knelt, hand light, on Abigail's knee. "You didn't come here to die. You came to breathe. And maybe you've been healing slow, waiting for the day it didn't hurt to open the door." "I failed them," she whispered. "You love them fierce," Elias countered. "You'd have traded places in a heartbeat. That's not failure. That's the truest thing a body can do." Abigail looked at him through the blur, seeing a boy who carried his own dead and still chose to protect what was left. "I've been scared stiff," she admitted. "Scared to let anybody in, scared to care. Because what if the mountain takes them too? Then you love them while they're here, Elias said. Ma told me after Pa lit out, the only thing worse than losing love is never handing it out. Clara pulled back, small palms cupping Abigail's wet cheeks. Don't cry. Elias and me stay in it. Abigail pressed a trembling kiss to the child's forehead. For the first time in 7 years, the thought of new love didn't feel like treason. It felt like sunrise. A sharp knock rattled the door. 3 hard raps that cut the quiet like an axe. Elias rose, hand drifting to the skinning knife at his belt, every sense suddenly sharp. In the 3 weeks since the blizzard had blown itself out, no boot had crossed Abigail's threshold. The knock that came now, 3 heavy raps, carried the weight of authority. Abigail's hand froze on the coffee pot. She knew that cadence. Sheriff's Deputy Harlan stood framed in the doorway when she opened it, tin star flashing cold against the low winter sun. He filled the opening like a cork in a bottle, shoulders squared, eyes already measuring. Afternoon, Ms. Thorne. He tipped his hat without warmth. Mind if I step in? Got questions. Abigail moved aside, spine stiff. Can't imagine what drags you 20 miles through snow, Deputy. His gaze prowled the room. Clara's rag doll on the table, Elias's patch coat on the peg, 2 extra bowls drying by the stove. It settled on Elias like a hand on a holster. Talk in town, says you've taken in strays, kids, specifically. He lowered himself into the rocking chair without asking. This be Elias and Clara Carver? They're wintering here, Abigail said, voice flat. My roof, my say. Harlan's brow lifted at the surname. Carver, huh? Funny, my mother's maiden name was Carver, over in Dry Gulch. You kin to the late Daniel Carver. Elias met the stare. My mother was Ruth Carver. Died of pox 4 months back. Daniel's girl. Harlan scratched his jaw. Heard he raised you after your pa skipped. Shame he didn't teach you to stay put. The last words carried a bite. Clara edged behind Elias, small fingers twisted in his shirt. Abigail stepped between them. The children are under my care. Law's got no claim. Depends. Harlan leaned forward, badge catching the firelight. Folks are asking about legal guardianship. A lone woman, no husband, no church roll. Some wonder if that's fit for raising young uns. Abigail's chin lifted. State your business plain, Deputy. Plain is, kids belong with proper families. Married, God-fearing, in town where they can be seen. Reverend and Mrs. Whitlock have opened their home to orphans. Good Christian folks, stipend from the county, Sunday school every week. Elias's stomach turned to stone. He'd heard whispers. The Whitlocks took in children for the government dollar and worked them from dawn to dark. They're not orphans while I breathe, Elias said, voice low but steady. And they're not leaving. Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Boy, isolation ain't upbringing. Ms. Thorne here hasn't darkened a church door since she crawled up this mountain. How's that prepare you for civilized life? I've patched every leak in this place, split a winter's wood, and kept meat on the table, Elias said. That's more honest work than some town men do in a year. Work's fine, Harlan said. Salvation's another. The Whitlocks can see to both. Abigail felt the walls she'd built, log by log, winter by winter, start to buckle. Everything Abigail had dreaded, the world's long arm reaching in to snatch away what she'd only just begun to hold, stood smirking on her porch in the shape of Deputy Harlan. I believe you're done here, she said, voice low but edged. I'll circle back in a month, Harlan said, settling his hat. Give you time to think what's best for young uns. If things ain't changed, I'll bring papers. He tapped the star on his chest. Territory don't play about child welfare, Miss Thorne. The door shut. Silence fell like a dropped quilt. Elias broke it first, fists white on the table's edge. He won't split us. Abigail drew both children in, one under each arm. He will not. We're family now. Families fight. But the fight had only put on boots. Mary's fever struck before dawn, a furnace under bird-bone ribs. Elias woke to her thin, lost whimpers. Abigail, Clara's burning. Abigail was already there, leather medico satchel in hand, the one Elias had never seen. She knelt, palm to the child's brow, counting pulse against her own heartbeat. High heat, fast breath. Could be lung fever. Could be worse. The satchel opened like a field hospital. Glass vials labeled herbs, a tiny scale, forceps, a stethoscope of polished wood and brass. Where? Elias started. Midwife first, wife second, Abigail said, measuring willow bark into a tin cup. Out here you doctor yourself, or die trying. She brewed, steeped, cooled. Elias lifted Clara's head. Abigail spooned bitter draught between cracked lips. The girl's eyes floated unmoored. Will she? Elias couldn't finish. We fight, Abigail said. Together. 3 days blurred into lantern smoke and willow steam. Abigail dosed every 2 hours, bathed Clara in snowmelt, changed sweat-soaked shifts. Elias held his sister through the shakes, sang the cracked lullabies their mother had hummed over cook fires, refused the cot, even when his knees buckled. On the second night, when the fever crested and Clara's breath sawed like a dull blade, Abigail did something Elias never expected. She sang, not the raw trail tunes of the mountains, but a clear, trained soprano that filled the cabin like church bells. Hush now, my baby, the moon's riding high, over the mesas where nighthawks cry. Sleep now, my darling, till sunrise is near. Mama will guard you. There's nothing to fear. Her hand smoothed Clara's hair with the same rhythm she'd once used on Henry and Ruth. Tears slipped, but the melody never wavered. You sang that to your own, Elias whispered in the hush between verses. Every night, Abigail answered, voice catching, thought the words were buried with them. It's helping, Elias said. Listen, her breaths easing. Clara's chest rose slower, deeper. The fever still raged, but the song had carved a small harbor in the storm. Something in Abigail's lullaby had slipped past the fever's guard. Clara's thrashing eased. Her breath slowed from whistle to sigh. By the third dawn the heat broke, leaving the child slick with honest sweat, eyes bright and fixed on Elias. Water, she croaked. Elias's hand shook so hard he nearly spilled the cup. Abigail steadied it, guiding Clara's chin while the girl drank in tiny, grateful swallows. You saved her, Elias said when Clara finally slept. We saved her, Abigail answered. Your stubborn heart kept her tethered. That's medicine too. Elias studied the woman who had seemed carved from granite. You never told me you were a midwife. Couldn't speak the word without bleeding, Abigail said. Delivered half the valley, lost my own 2 anyway. Locked the satchel and the memories together. She tucked a curl behind Clara's ear. For Clara, the lock snapped open. For both of you. Elias took her calloused hand. You're the mother we ran out of road looking for. And you're the children I stopped believing would come, Abigail whispered. Outside, the wind still prowled, but inside the cabin the word family no longer felt borrowed. Elias stepped back to survey the new hearth. River boulders chosen for density and grain, each one a heat bank that would glow long after the fire slept. Ground hole, Abigail asked, watching him seat the keystone. Ma taught me to build past tomorrow, Elias said, tapping the level. This'll warm our great-grandchildren's boots. Clara knelt nearby, sorting pebbles into spirals and starbursts. Abigail's idea. The girl's eye for pattern had surprised them all. These blue ones shine like creek glass, Clara said, offering a handful. Right up front, where folks will see. Prime real estate, Elias grinned. Your signature on the house. Abigail marveled at the boy's craft. He had dismantled the old hearth with a surgeon's care, salvaged every sound brick, then redrawn the firebox wider, deeper, crowned with a mantel beam he'd hewn from a single lightning-struck cedar. The new fireplace would draw cleaner, throw heat farther, and, with Clara's mosaic, lift the room from frontier to forever. Elias had sketched the firebox on butcher paper, complete with baffles and a hidden ash drop that would keep the draw steady even in high wind. The hearth was deep enough for a cauldron to feed a dozen, the throat angled to swallow smoke hole. Where'd a boy learn drafting like that? Abigail asked, tracing the elevations. Ma's books, Elias said, thumbing mortar from his knuckles. Survey manuals, bridge schematics, a stonemason's diary from Chicago. She said a carpenter who quits learning starts building coffins. Word traveled on snowshoes and sledges. Neighbors came first to gawk, then to linger. That lad sets stone like he was born holding a trowel, grunted Tom Bledsoe, a rancher who'd once called Abigail that crazy widow. Ain't seen a hearth laid that true since the fort was raised. His wife, Ellen, pressed a loaf of rye into Abigail's hands. You're all welcome at meeting come Sunday. Reverend Whitlock drones, but the coffee's hot and the company's real. Abigail met Elias's eyes, both remembering Harlan's threats. We'll talk on it, she said. Week by week the fireplace rose, each course level within a hair. Elias mixed clay and lime to a recipe he'd tested in a coffee tin, strong enough for a century of freeze and thaw. The stones became a calendar, every lift a promise they meant to stay. On the night he capped the chimney, Elias struck spark to kindling. Flame roared up the flue without a wisp of backsmoke. The room filled with clean, rolling heat. Clara squealed as her blue pebbles flashed like sapphires in the firelight. Prettiest hearth in the whole territory. Abigail drew the children against her sides. The new masonry radiated warmth that sank into bones and memory alike. You gave us roots, Elias. Something the wind can't blow away. We gave each other roots, he corrected. Later, when the cabin slept under a hush of snow, Abigail eased up a floorboard and lifted out a small, leather-bound journal, its spine cracked from secret readings. She cradled the journal a long moment, as if it might burn her palms, then set it on the table between them like a loaded rifle. Samuel looked up from the harness strap, needle poised. Mary slept curled in the rocker, one thumb loose at her mouth. You owe me nothing you ain't ready to give, he said. I owe us the truth, Martha answered. She opened the book. The pages were dense with ink, diagrams, Latin conjugations, marginalia, and French. If we're family, and if we're fixing to stare down Harlan and the rest, you need the whole map. She turned to a page dated 1870. I wasn't just the preacher's wife. I graduated Helena Women's Seminary, one of 12. Taught calculus to girls while most men couldn't spell it. Had a classroom, chalk dust in my hair, and a blackboard full of proofs. Samuel leaned in. The handwriting was crisp, economical, the mind behind it restless and exact. You ran a school? Built one. Thomas preached. I taught. We wanted a town where girls read Virgil and boys learned to read at all. She flipped pages, lesson plans, enrollment tallies, a sketch of a lending library. Then David and Emma came. I thought the world had handed me every prize. The entries grew softer. First steps, first words, a pressed violet from Emma's hair. Then the ink turned jagged. After the fever took them, the town took the rest. Said my unnatural learning had angered God. Said a woman who thought herself equal to men had no right to keep her children. Her laugh was brittle. I burned my notes, sold the press, gave away every book that smelled of ideas. Came here to finish the punishment. Samuel closed the journal gently. You didn't bring the fever, and you didn't stop being brilliant just because grief told you to. Martha's eyes glistened. I hid the journal under the floorboards the day I arrived. First time I've opened it in 7 years. He pushed it back toward her. Then let's write the next chapter together. You, me, Mary, and every kid who'll ever sit by this fire learning fractions or French. Harlan wants to talk upbringing? We'll show him a school. I couldn't burn the last of her, Martha said, sliding the journal shut. Some member knew I'd need proof one day that I'd once been more than grief. Samuel's hand stayed over hers. Morrison wants the broken version of you. He's in for surprise. A sharp crunch of hose on frozen crust snapped them upright. 3 riders reined up in the yard, breath pluming in the dawn. The leader swung down heavy, coat flapping like a crow's wing. A rolled parchment clutched like a warrant. Morning, widow, he called. Briggs. Got papers to straighten out ownership. Martha stepped onto the porch, Samuel a half-pace behind, Mary's small hand in his. State your claim, Mr. Briggs. He unfurled the deed with a snap. Wax seals, red ribbons, surveyor's flourish. Mountain Creek Mining Consortium holds title to these 240 acres. Copper vein runs clean through your kitchen. The thin man beside him unrolled a map, contour lines, assay marks, a bold X over the cabin. Worth a fortune to men who can dig. Martha took the documents, eyes flicking across ink and seal. "Pretty work," she said. "Too bad the territorial seals, missing the eagles left alone. New die since '79. And your surveyor, Mr. Halvorson, has been dead since the smallpox winter of '82. Hard to stamp fresh deeds from the grave." Briggs's smile thinned to a blade. "Careful, ma'am. Accusing honest claim of fraud is a hanging offense in some courts." Samuel's pulse hammered, but pride burned hotter. Martha didn't flinch. "Then let the court come," she said. "I filed original patent in Helena, recorded in ink that hasn't faded. Bring your forgeries to Judge Harlan's bench. He'll spot the rot faster than I did." Briggs remounted, the parchment curling in his fist. "Enjoy your snow, widow. Spring thaw brings surveyors who don't ask nice." Hooves drummed away, leaving only the wind and the smell of threatened copper. Samuel exhaled. "They'll be back." Martha's eyes were steel. "Then we'll be ready. Family, law, and every lesson I ever taught about evidence." She turned to the children. "Time is sharpened more than axes." Samuel stepped to the window. In the yard, half a dozen saddled horses stood tethered. Josiah Henley leaned against the corral rail, rifle across his arm. Tom Bledsoe and 3 other ranchers checked loads in their carbines, faces set like flint. Sarah and Ellen Henley were already unloading burlap sacks, flour, coffee, cartridges, supplies for a siege if it came to that. Word travels fast when crooks ride in daylight. Josiah called through the open door. "We ride circuit till the inspector pins M. Nobody lays a hand on your place, Martha." Briggs's face purpled. "This is private business." "Private ends where murder starts," Tom cut in. "Mount up and ride, or we'll deliver you to Crawford Trust like turkeys." The thin man's hand twitched toward his pistol, but 6 rifles answered with a single metallic chorus. Briggs spat, swung aboard, and the 3 spurred out in a spray of snow. Martha let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Samuel turned to her, eyes shining. "You turned the whole valley into family." "No," she said, watching the riders fan out to guard the trails. "We did." Samuel stood on the porch, rifle across his arm, watching Deputy Morrison ride in with the others. The man's badge glinted like a second sun, but his eyes carried none of the old swagger. "Afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore," Morrison said, dismounting. Heard claim jumpers were sniffing around. "Figured the law ought to be on the right side of the fence for once." Martha handed him the forged deed and the surveyor's map. Morrison studied them, jaw tightening with each wrong seal and dead man's signature. "Briggs is wanted in 2 territory for the same game," he said. "These papers wouldn't fool a drunk clerk." He looked at Samuel and Mary, then at the ring of armed neighbors. "Looks like you've got a proper posse already. I'll ride circuit with M till Crawford arrives." Samuel felt the knot in his chest loosen. The man who'd threatened to tear his family apart now stood shoulder to shoulder with the men guarding their gate. Josiah clapped Morrison on the back. "Glad you're late to the party, but still on the guest list, Deputy." Sarah Henley set a second basket on the step. Venison stew, cornbread, a jar of chokecherry jam. "Eat while it's hot. Siege rations taste better with neighbors." Inside, Martha poured coffee for the patrol leaders. Samuel watched her move with the calm of a general who just won the first skirmish without firing a shot. "Reckon Briggs'll think twice now," Tom Patterson said, warming his hands at the new hearth. "Whole valley's got eyes on this ridge." Mary tugged Samuel's sleeve. "Does this mean we get to keep our blue stones?" Samuel knelt, brushing snow from her braids. "Every last one, little architect." Martha caught his eye over the child's head. In the firelight, the cabin felt bigger than its walls. Big enough for a schoolroom, a mill, a future no forged paper could steal. Outside, the patrol fanned across the trails, lanterns bobbing like slow fireflies against the dark. Inside, the hearth threw steady heat, and the journal lay open on the table, new pages waiting for ink. "They're defending the whole valley's right to exist," Martha finished. "I'll be with them." Briggs reined up at the edge of the yard. 6 riders fanned behind him. A portly man in a city coat clutched a leather satchel. Lawyer, no doubt. Crawford never lifted his eye from the transit. "Morning, Inspector," Briggs called, voice honey over gravel. "Hope you're not wasting good daylight on this widow's fairy tales." Crawford straightened, calm as winter steel. "Daylight's mine to spend. Your survey claims this corner post sits 30 rods west of here." He tapped the iron stake at his feet. "Transit says it's exactly where Mrs. Whitmore's deed places it. Recorded 1878, Helena Land Office." Care to explain the discrepancy? The lawyer dismounted, papers fluttering. "Simple clerical adjustment." "Clerical don't move iron stakes," Crawford cut in. "Your map shows a bearing of north 42 degrees, 15 foot east. True bearing is north 42 degrees, 08 foot. 7 minutes off, over 12 rods by the time you reach the creek. That's not a typo, gentlemen. That's fraud." Briggs's smile thinned. "Possession's the law we're here to enforce." Josiah thumbed back his hammer with an audible click. 12 rifles answered in kind. "Possession ends where federal survey begins," Morrison said, stepping forward, star bright on his chest. "Stand down, Briggs. You're under territorial warrant." The lawyer's face went the color of lard. Briggs's hand twitched toward his holster. Samuel felt Martha's grip tighten on his shoulder. "Root cellar," she whispered. "Now." He scooped Mary, but his feet wouldn't move. Not while Martha stood unarmed between the transit and the guns. Crawford lifted a red flag on a short staff. "The universal signal for official survey in progress. Any man crosses this line before I file my report answers to a U.S. Marshal." For a heartbeat, the yard held its breath. Then Briggs spat, wheeled his horse, and the riders thundered back down the ridge, papers scattering like startled birds. Crawford lowered the flag. "Survey's complete. Mrs. Whitmore's title is ironclad. Briggs and company will be in irons by sundown." Josiah hooped. Rifles lowered. Mary wriggled free and ran to Martha, who caught her up in shaking arms. Samuel met Martha's eyes over the child's head. "Family," he said. "Family," she echoed, and the words settled into the frozen ground like the corner post itself. Permanent, measured, true. Crawford dipped his pen, the nib scratching like frost across glass. "By authority of the territory of Montana," he intoned, "I witness and record the adoption of Samuel Morrison and Mary Morrison by Martha Elizabeth Whitmore, effective this 14th day of March, 1882. All rights of inheritance, guardianship, and kinship fully vested." He blotted the page, then turned the Bible so Martha could add her signature beneath his. Her hand did not tremble. Samuel signed next, letters square and proud. Mary gripped the pen in both fists and drew a careful, wobbly M beside his name. Martha kissed the ink while it was still wet. Crawford closed the Bible, slid the adoption certificate into a stiff envelope, and sealed it with red wax and the territorial stamp. "This document is filed in Helena by week's end. Any man who questions it answers to a federal judge." Briggs sat handcuffed to his own saddle horn, the lawyer pale beside him. Their forged papers curled to ash in the new hearth, copper-colored sparks dying against the stones Samuel had laid. Josiah Henley let out a low whistle. "Reckon that fire's the only copper they'll ever see on this land." Sarah laughed, the sound bright as breaking ice. "Martha, when you decide to dig, half the valley will line up for honest wages." Martha looked at the faces ringing her porch, neighbors who had once kept their distance, now standing guard with rifles and coffee and hope. She looked at Samuel, shoulders square under a man's coat, though he was still shy of 13. She looked at Mary, cheeks flushed from cold and triumph. "This land stays ours," she said, "but the first thing we build is a schoolhouse. Copper can wait. Children can't." Crawford tipped his hat. "I'll file the mineral report all the same. If there's, or Mrs. Whitmore, it'll be your or, and your decision." Samuel felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones like good mortar. The cabin behind him was no longer a refuge. It was a cornerstone. The valley beyond was no longer a wilderness. It was a promise. He squeezed Mary's hand. "Forever and always," he whispered. Martha heard him and answered without turning. "Forever and always." Samuel stepped back, hammer still warm in his hand, and read the sign aloud. The Whitmore family. The letters caught the last slant of sun, black paint gleaming against the pine like fresh ink on a deed. Martha rested a hand on Mary's shoulder and the other on Samuel's. "Look straight and true," she said, "like everything you build." Below them, the yard still bore the churned snow of the morning's drama, but already neighbors were hauling in trestle tables. Sarah Henley stirred a cauldron of venison stew over an open fire. Tom Patterson tuned a fiddle. Josiah's boys raced Mary to fetch kindling. Laughter rose with the wood smoke. Samuel opened the gold watch, its tick steady as a heartbeat, and checked the hour. "Supper in 20 minutes if we want to feed the whole posse." Martha's eyes shone. "Then let's feed them." Family takes care of family. Inside, the new hearth threw steady heat across the room. The Bible lay open on the table, adoption page still fragrant with fresh ink. Samuel hung his father's broken watch on a peg beside the door, an old life honored, not hidden. The new one nestled against his heart, counting minutes that belonged to all of them now. Mary tugged Martha toward the kitchen. "I'm in charge of biscuits." Samuel followed, rolling sleeves already dusted with sawdust and hope. Outside, the mountains kept their ancient silence, but the cabin answered with light, voices, and the smell of bread rising. The Whitmore family had come home. The sign caught the low sun like a promise kept. Samuel ran a thumb across the carved letters. Asterisk, asterisk, the Whitmore family, asterisk, asterisk. Feeling the grain he'd planed smooth, the paint he'd mixed with lampblack and linseed. 6 months of honest sweat had gone into every joint and shingle behind it. Martha folded the prosecutor's letter and tucked it beside the Bible. "Briggs draws water and breaks rocks till 1887. The territory thanks us for the privilege of locking the door." Mary twirled in the yard, apron fluttering. "Does that mean the bad men are gone forever?" "Long enough for you to grow tall and bossy," Samuel teased, swinging her up until she squealed. Martha's eyes drifted to the ridge where the copper vein slept. The Helena Company wired final terms this morning. 50-50 split on or after costs. Homestead stays ours. School gets first call on profits. Samuel whistled low. "You kept the land and the future." "I kept us," she corrected. "The land was always here. We're what's new." Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of venison and sage. Inside, the hearth Samuel had rebuilt glowed with the same river stones Mary had chosen, blue as summer sky, warm as bread. The cabin had grown a wing for guests, a loft for books, a corner where Martha's old seminary chalkboard now listed spelling words and arithmetic. Mary tugged Martha's sleeve. "When do we start the school?" "Groundbreaking's at first thaw," Martha said. "You'll ring the bell for the little ones." Samuel checked the gold watch. Its tick steady as his own pulse. "Supper in 10. Neighbors will be here soon." Martha smiled, the kind that reached every corner of the room. "Then let's feed the valley. Family takes care of family." Later, when the tables were pushed back and the fiddles sang, Samuel stood on the porch with Martha. Lanterns bobbed between the pines. Laughter rose like sparks. "Pa would have liked this," he said quietly. Martha slipped an arm around his shoulders. "He'd say you built more than a house, son. You built a life." The sign gleamed above them, letters black against the dusk. The Whitmore family. Not an ending, but a beginning carved deep enough to outlast the mountains themselves. Samuel closed the watch with a soft snap, the gold warm against his palm. "To my son." The words no longer felt borrowed. They fit like the vest Martha had sewn to his new shoulders. Inside, the kitchen table already groaned under noon provisions. Cornbread, salt pork, early greens from the cold frame. Mary set out 3 tin cups with the solemn ceremony of a priestess. "Schoolhouse first," she declared, sliding a slate towards Samuel. "I want windows tall enough for hopscotch shadows." Martha laughed, the sound bright as creek water. "Windows, hopscotch, and a bell you can ring till the crows complain." Deputy Morrison lingered at the door, hat in hand. "Governor's grant covers lumber and wages. Rest is up to valley hands." He glanced at Samuel. "Reckon we'll all be taking orders from the foreman here." Samuel felt the weight settle easy, like a well-balanced beam. Blueprints by supper, he promised. They ate with the windows open, mountain air carrying the mill's steady song. The wheels Samuel had coaxed back to life turned day and night now, grinding for half the homesteads in the valley. Copper from the partnership bought nails, glass, and the luxury of hiring a second teacher come fall. After lunch, Martha spread butcher paper across the table. Samuel sketched while Mary inked flowers in the margins. 20 desks, he said, south-facing, raised floor for heat circulation. Bell tower here. And a porch for recess, Mary cut in. Martha traced the roofline with a mother's pride and a teacher's precision. Room for 50 pupils by the time you're ringing that bell yourself, Mary. Outside, the sign caught the afternoon light. The Whitmore family. Below it, the garden rows marched straight and sure. Beans, corn, the future in neat green lines. Samuel paused at the threshold, watch in hand. The minute hand swept past 12, steady as the mill, patient as love. Time to build, he said. Martha took Mary's hand. Samuel took Martha's. Together, they stepped into the yard where neighbors already waited with hammers, hope, and the certainty that whatever rose next would carry their name for 100 years.